Well, I hope you know we just want to have some fun around here, okay? And it's good to be in this series, Kids These Days, and to have fun and just look at some different things that help us learn about and maybe better understand kids these days. Well, last week, as Pastor Mark mentioned, we launched this series, and we hope that it equips you and resources you as we were thinking about kids going back to school. We just wanted to, and thinking about them really going back to normal, we just wanted to have a little bit of fun. And what we realized is this: kids these days matter. Right? They matter, and we get to be a part of showing them they matter by being intentional. How do we get to be intentional? Well, it's through a relationship with them. We recognize the importance of these little ones. We looked at Luke chapter 18 when Jesus was dealing with these different adults, right? You have many adults in those passages, and yet you see him pause for a minute. And he just welcomes the little ones, right? He just welcomes the least of these to him. And so what we realize in that moment is we can learn a lot about kids these days. They teach us to trust God completely, how to love one another. And as much as kids need adults these days, adults need kids these days. But out of all of it, we learn that kids these days, it's complicated. Right? Now, again, I want to be clear. I didn't say they are complicated or kids these days are complicated. It's complicated. That things are different. We looked at generational gaps. Things are different than the way we grew up. Right? School is different. Economies are different. It is different than the way maybe we did things. Church is different. And what we realize is that being a kid these days is different. As adults looking to disciple the next generation, looking to equip and disciple them, we may not fully understand, we may not fully know, but we can have empathy and we can be people who disciple with empathy. A study from Stanford University research showed that it was more about seeking to understand than understanding fully. See, it isn't walking a mile in their shoes. I don't know if you remember the picture of Caroline trying to walk in my shoes. She had to hold the wall because the shoes didn't quite fit. And I know if I try to put on shoes, it wouldn't be good either, right? We couldn't wear each other's shoes. But maybe it's the idea, empathy is this idea that it's not about walking in their shoes. It's not about fully understanding, but maybe it's about seeking to understand. It's about cheering them on. As different as things may be, we cheer them on. And it's about coming alongside and sitting with them in hard times. See, Fuller Youth Institute says this: fear is not the solution. Empathy is. Sometimes we can be people who are afraid of what we don't fully understand. Right? We can be afraid of what it might look like. We can be afraid in all these different things. And really, fear is not the solution when it comes to discipling the next generation. Empathy is. We don't have to be afraid of what we don't understand, of what is different. Instead, we can come along and seek to understand together. Well, last week we talked about kids matter, right? Kids matter. And so this week it's just now for us to really focus about family matters, right? The family matters. And next week, we're going to talk a little bit about peer pressures and different things that kids go through and this isolated connection that we have and that kids these days experience. But this week, we're going to talk about family matters. And I don't know if you're like me, but you're going to learn to understand that this is why it's hard for me to prepare for sermons. Because when I see the words family matters, or I hear family matters, I began to think of a family that I used to watch their TV show back in the day, and their theme song went a little bit like this.
It's a rare condition this day and age to read any good news on the newspaper page. And love and tradition of the grand design, some people say it's even harder to find. Well, then there must be some magic clue inside these gentle walls. 'Cause all I see is a tower of dreams, real love bursting out of every scene. We're gonna fill our house with happiness. but we'll smother the blues with tenderness. There's room for you, room for me, for gentle hearts and opportunity. It's the bigger love of the family.
How many of you seen that show? Yeah. And if you haven't, maybe you can go home and this can be the next show you just binge watch, right? I don't know. There's a lot of streaming out there. You can probably find it somewhere. But it was a good show. But I don't know if we've ever truly listened to the theme song that we just heard, right? It's actually titled As Days Go By. And when we think about kids these days, I realized this week, and really it's a reminder often, that my Caroline, who is going to be 8, is no longer 2. Is no longer 3, is no longer 4, is no longer 5, right? I look at Charlie and I say, wow, Caroline, you're getting so much bigger. And as days go by, I continue to think about just our family, right? And how family matters. But I want to remind us of just some of the words that song mentioned. It says, it's a rare condition this day and age to read any good news on the newspaper page. Love and tradition of the grand design, some people say it's even harder to find. Well, then there must be some magic clue inside these gentle walls, because all I see is a tower of dreams, real love bursting out of every seam. As days go by, we're going to fill our house with happiness. The moon may cry, we're going to smother the blues with tenderness. When days go by, there is room for you, room for me, for gentle hearts and an opportunity. As days go by, it's the bigger love. It's the bigger love of the family. Now, I know this is just a theme song for us, right, for this show. But I'm wondering this morning, as we think about discipling kids these days, right? We think about discipling the next generation, right? Not younger, the next generation. Is there really room for you and for me, right? Is there really room for gentle hearts and an opportunity? I'm wondering this morning if for kids these days, there really is a bigger love of a family. If you have your Bibles, we're going to be in John chapter 15, and I kind of want to ponder this idea this morning. And so Jesus, as we get to John chapter 15, Jesus is preparing his disciples for his departure. Right? He's preparing them and he's reminding them. He's what is he doing? He's discipling the next generation, right? He's saying, you're going to be left, right? You are the ones that's going to be here, right? I'm going away. I'm going to prepare a place for you, and you are going to be left. And so we kind of see throughout chapters 14, 15, we just see a bunch of red words, right? We see this great response of Jesus. And what's he really responding to? If you go back to 14, you'll see that Judas, and I want to make it clear because the Bible makes it clear, it's not the one that betrayed him, but Judas asked him this question. But Lord, why do you intend to show yourself to us and not the world? That's a great question. If I ever get the opportunity to ask Jesus a question, I don't know what I'm going to ask. I don't know if I'll be that profound, right? But he said, Lord, why do you intend to show yourself to us and not the world? To which Jesus sums up this reply in chapter 14, verse 31. But the world must learn that I love the Father and that I do exactly what my Father has commanded me. Right? The world must learn that I love the Father and that I do exactly what my Father has commanded me. See, Jesus wants the world to know about the love that he has for the Father and the importance of faithful obedience. That's what he's talking about through this. And we get to this part in chapter 15, verses 9 through 17, and Jesus continues to communicate this response to the disciples, right? He continues to communicate, say, hey, you want to know why I revealed myself to you and not the world? Because you get to go and be the love that I have shown you to the world. You get to go and be and reveal myself to the world. He says this, starting in verse 9, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remained in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know the master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last. And so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. Verse 17, this is my command: love each other. This response by Jesus for this chapter and the ones to come is important for us, right? There's some significance to it, and it's a response of love and obedience. See, if family matters, then what is our response? If kids these days matter, then what is our response? What is the church's response to discipling the next generation? It's love, right? It's love and obedience, right? Jesus is saying love and remain. He's saying love and obedience. Why? Because kids these days need loved. Kids these days need love. There's no doubt that in the world that we live in, that the world in and of itself needs love. We need to love each other, is what Jesus commanded in verse 17. Right? Not only that, but he urges the disciples to remain in love. Love was said 8 times throughout that passage. Just those short verses, love was said 8 times. Remain was said just as many. See, Jesus knows the power of love. He knows the power of love. Kids these days need to know the same power. We sang about it just a minute ago in worship. Kids these days need to know the same power. As the church, this is the response to discipling the next generation. It is through love. It is through love. Last week we talked about generational gaps. See, the generational gaps are the different thoughts and actions and opinions and tastes that are exhibited by members of younger generations versus older ones. See, each generation is different. Each generation is different, has different experiences, actions, opinions. And we realize that kids these days, it's complicated. Why? Because it's different. Church was different. School was different. All these things were different. And that's okay. But love these days is complicated. It's complicated. Why? Because it's different. What do I mean by it's different? Well, as much as there is generational gaps that impact kids these days, there's cultural gaps that impact kids these days, right? Culture gaps are, a culture gap is a systematic difference between two cultures that can make it difficult for people to understand each other and have good relations. These differences can include values, behaviors, education, and customs. See, cultural gaps can also refer to misunderstandings within society. What makes it complicated, right? What makes it complicated is through cultural gaps, we all have different maybe ideas, different thoughts, different values of what love might look like. See, as a culture, as a society, as groups of individuals, our idea of love can become many different things. There are these misunderstandings within society of what love is. How do I know that? Well, culturally, things are different, right? And they've been different, and we see some differences in that. But society, and especially kids these days, if you've been around younger kids or teenagers or anyone maybe younger than where you are now, you'll see that we speak in different languages. And I'm not necessarily talking about Spanish and French and things we learn in school, but I'm talking about code languages. You ever seen a kid speak in code languages or had a text message that was in code and you had to decipher what was actually being said? You had to go to Google and be like, what does this mean? In case you don't know, I've got a few things on here to kind of show you what I'm talking about, right? There's this list of abbreviations that we're going to go through. And I started out easy, and I think we get a little bit harder. But the first one, anybody, if you know it, just shout it out. Laugh out loud, right? So now you're writing this down. You're like, that's what that means, okay? Laugh out loud. What about this one? Be right back, right? Be right back. What about this one? We getting harder. We getting hard. What? For what it's worth. For what it's worth. How about this one? I'm hearing a little bit of it. In my opinion, in my humble opinion. That don't even make sense, okay? That doesn't even make, in my opinion, in my humble opinion. Like, what are we doing? You know, what are we doing? It doesn't even make sense, right? But what about this one? Just for fun. It's just like math in school. They were like, hey, we got these numbers. Let's throw some letters with it. And it's like now we're like, hey, we got these letters. Let's throw some numbers in it just for fun. Like, let's mix everything up, right? Let's just mix it all up. And so they did it. Here's a good one for me, a funny one. What or seriously is correct, all right? Every other one's been like a sentence. Can we just add the vowels and make it the word, okay? Like, what are we doing? You know, what are we doing? Like, come on, you basically spelled the word already. Just add the vowels, okay? But that's what we are. That's what we do. What about this one? That feeling when. And I left that one last because that feeling when you don't understand any of it, okay? It's like, wait a minute, these codes are getting out of hand. I'm trying to understand it, and I just can't quite understand it, right? I was talking with somebody this week about love languages. There was this big kick about love languages and different things, and we tried to find our love language, right? We said, my love language is this, right? We said it's physical touch, or it's words of affirmation. It's all these things. And the reality is that's great that you learn maybe the list or the order of these different love languages, but we need all the love languages ultimately, right? We need all these love languages, and we speak in these codes. And what we realize is it's hard to love what we're trying to figure out, right? We're trying to, what's your love language? I'm trying to figure out, what do you need? Kids, what do you need? I'm trying to figure it out, right? But I can't, and love in today's culture feels like a code. It feels like a code we're trying to break, and it's hard because we don't fully understand and we don't fully know how. See, culturally, there are these gaps that create more confusion than certainty. They create these gaps that just leave us confused than feeling certain. And our idea of love, our understanding of love has been impacted by the different cultures that we have experienced throughout our lives. As much as cultures change, though, we gotta understand this. As much as cultures change, as much as languages change, the love that Jesus defines for us doesn't. Right? He's looking at his disciples and he's saying, look, this is what you ought to do. This is what you ought to be. This is who you are. The love of Jesus doesn't change. And love that Jesus describes for us isn't just spoken love. It's just not a verbal communication, but it's a love that has action. Right? It has action behind it. Verse 13, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friend. That is unconditional love. That is being expressed through action. There's a few things we learn about love through action. The first one is this. What is love through action? It's sacrifice. It's sacrifice. No greater love than this, than we lay down our lives for another. What do I mean by sacrifice? See, a lot of times when we talk to adults, or we as adults think about kids these days, we'd say, sacrifice. Well, put food on the table, they got clothes on their back, and there's a roof over their head. And the reality is that's our responsibility, right? That's our responsibility. There's a difference between sacrifice as responsibility and sacrifice as a privilege. Right, as a privilege. Sacrifice is a privilege. It's so much more than a responsibility. There really is no greater love than sacrifice. And what is sacrifice that has action behind it? I mentioned in the first week as we were going through this that I'm not a perfect example, right? I'm learning. As I continue to be a parent, as I continue to be a pastor, I'm learning. Pastor Mark is learning, right? We're not the go-to be-alls, right? We're not as great as I think we might be. We're not perfect, right? We're not perfect. And I remembered last week talking about this, and there's one thing I try to do with my kids, right? To show them love, to tell them their love. It is to do that, right? At random, I'll just look over and tell my kids, I love you. Or maybe in moments where they did something good. Or maybe even in moments where they're upset, they're hurt. I'll say, I love you. Whatever it may be, I say, I love you. And true story. I looked over at Claire and Caroline one day, and mind you, Claire's 4, okay? I looked over at Claire, and I said, I love you. And she goes, we know, you tell us all the time. You know, and I laughed, right? That was the response. Like, I laughed. I was like, fair enough. All right, okay. I was expecting an I love you too, but I'll take it, right? I'll take it. But then it dawned on me that love is so much more than just verbal, right? It's so much more than just a verbal affirmation. See, love, I found out this week, it was Friday. I had been working all day, and I was sitting at the kitchen table and just trying to get some more work done, and it was evening time, and Claire walks up to me. She's pulling her hair, as you saw in the video, and she's saying, Dad, I was thinking, maybe you and I could go on a date sometime. If you don't have too much time, then that's okay. And my heart began to break because my child sees me and says, Dad, if you don't have too much time, it's okay. I get it. Dad, if you don't have enough time, it's all right. And I realized that love is so much more than just the words of affirmation that we say, but the love that Jesus calls us to, the love that he's telling the disciples is one that is backed up with sacrifice, and it's a love that has action behind it. Right? It's a love that is so much more. Sacrifice is a privilege. Right? It's a privilege. The second thing is we can love our kids through action by prioritizing the culture around us. We can prioritize the culture around us. What do I mean by that? Prioritize church. Keep God first. Keep God first. Not just coming to church, but in your homes. In your homes. I shared a video. One of my favorite things is our girls will turn on YouTube and they begin to dance to worship songs. Right? They're having church right here in their living room. They're having church, right? They're keeping God first. We can learn a lot from kids, right? We can learn a lot from kids. How about this one? Prioritize your marriage. If you really want to love kids these days, love your marriage. Love your marriage, right? Love it because they are seeing how you love each other. Too much information, TMI right here. Every time I come home, I've been very intentional lately to come home and give Jennifer a kiss as soon as I get home. Too much information. I know, you're like, stop it. Where's this going? I do that, and you know what Charlie does? Ew, Dad. But it was so important to me that she did that because she's seeing something, right? She's seeing love in action, right? That no matter what the day was like, no matter what happened at home, no matter what, there is a love that is still matters, and the love that is important. That me and her mom, can still prioritize each other, right? Relationships are important. Prioritize your family. Prioritize your family. Family matters, and love leads us to action. Here's the truth. I know as I maybe shared those lists, you maybe began to feel different things. See, marriages aren't perfect. The church isn't perfect. Families aren't perfect. But by prioritizing them, we love through action. Maybe you're here and one of the three of these things hasn't gone the way you planned. My parents were divorced, right? My parents were divorced. That wasn't what was planned. We prioritized family as much as we could, but it wasn't always what was planned or the intention of it. But here's the beauty of love. The power of love. You ready? It's found in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 8 through 9. Above all, love each other deeply. Not just with a little bit, not just with just a smidge of it, but love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Love each other because it covers a multitude of sins. Because of love, it can cover the mess the broken, the hurting, the pain, and it offers something far greater than ourselves could ever imagine or grasp. See, by prioritizing the family, by prioritizing your marriage, by prioritizing the church, we allow love to cover over the imperfection and allow us to have action behind love. It's not just saying it, it's showing it. Kids these days just need loved. Kids these days just need love. Love where they are, not where you expect them to be. Ready? If we're going to love with action, we have to love kids these days where they are, not where we expect them to be. Many of us, I said this, have kids that are grown up, right? They're maybe no longer in the house. Maybe we have grandkids that we get to still love. But there's kids in this church that you impact and influence every day, right? That you impact and influence every day. And as the church, we get to love kids where they are, not where we expect them to be. I mentioned the story of me in children's church, right? I guess I'm having confession each week. This is really just me healing, is what I'm trying to say. But last week, I mentioned the story of I was in kids' church, and the children's pastor said, Josh, if you do that one more time, I'm going to go march you in the front row of adult church. And I was like, want to bet? And so we did it. And he was a man of his word. And he marched me down to the front row, and I sat there, right? And I remember that story. Now, the story I'm going to share this week is just one I've been told. I don't remember this one. I'm going to clear the air right now, okay? I'm not taking any credibility or any credit for these actions, okay? But as I mentioned, I was a kid that went to church. Doors were open. I was there. It was Wednesday night, Sunday morning, Sunday night. My mom worked at the church, so we were there on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. The doors weren't even open, but we were like, let's do it, right? We're going to roam the halls. We were at church, right? But I remember I had a cousin who was more like an aunt. So my mom was a part of a bigger family. She was the youngest in her family. And so I had a cousin who my mom and her were more in age, their age was just closer. So I say she's more like an aunt to me. And I was in 4th grade, and she invited me to come stay at her house. And so I went and stayed at her house, but I knew I had to be at church on Sunday. We didn't miss church on Sunday. She didn't go to church, but my mom knew I'd have to come home in time to go to church. So I'm at her house, and she had a really cool car. It was a convertible. And I just remember going down Seymour, and the wind, as a 4th grader, you're like, this is the coolest thing ever, right? I'm on top of the mountain. What is this? And she maybe listened to a little bit different music than what I was allowed to listen to. And I remember the song, and you might know it, Bad to the Bone came on the radio, right? And I'm like, things can't be cooler right now. I'm in a convertible, Bad to the Bone, right? I'm pretty cool. This is awesome. And then we went home that night, and the TV's on. And there's a lot of times the TV's just got different, you can't control what's on the TV, what's on the programs. Now you can with streaming. You can kind of monitor a little bit better. But the movie came on, Ace Ventura. I'm not recommending you watch that movie. I got to just side note, okay? Mark it. So I'm not recommending you watch this movie. But the movie came on, Ace Ventura, with Jim Carrey. And there's a scene in this movie where Jim Carrey plays a pet detective, and he's trying to solve the case of who stole this dolphin for the Miami Dolphins. It was his pet, okay, And he begins to communicate with his, you know what I'm getting at, right? With his backside, right? He begins to communicate with his bottom, all right? And he's trying to be funny. And so here I am watching this movie, hearing this song, and I show up to my 4th grade Sunday school class. And I got this little old lady as the teacher. And where I went to church, you had different Sunday school classes per age group, right? It was just, you had 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade Sunday school teacher. I walk in, and she says, Josh, how was your weekend? And I just began to sing Bad to the Bone with my rear end, right? I just began to do it. And she's like, this is not okay. She goes and gets my mom. My mom's like, you did what? And I was like, Mom, what? This was awesome. I had the best weekend of my life. What do you mean? And I realized later that song is not appropriate, right? that movie. And for me to do that is not appropriate, right? That wouldn't be okay. But you know what I realize? Is that kid that maybe the church could have said, come on, man. Like, get your act together. Come on, man. That kid was loved exactly where he was, not where the church expected him to be. See, the church continued to love me exactly where I was and not where it expected me to be. I realized very early in life I belonged. I belonged to the church. I belonged to the church. We get this mindset in church sometimes that you have to become like us, believe like us, and then you belong to us. And it's the complete opposite. You belong in the church. And as you belong in the church, you begin to understand the love of Jesus. You begin to understand what church is all about, and you begin to believe, right? We sang about that this morning. We believe, right? And then as you believe, then you become a little bit more. God's graces and love begin to allow you to become more like Him as we have surrendered who we are to who He calls us to be. See, I'm so thankful that the church loved me for where I was and not where they expected me to be. And here's the challenge this morning. If we really want to love others, love kids these days, we have to own it. We have to own it. What do I mean by that? See, discipling the next generation takes ownership. Not the ownership where you feel entitled. Not the ownership where we have earned it and deserve it and all these other things. No, it's an ownership that's really the complete opposite. See, ownership that says we're going to love like Jesus. We're going to love because the Father has loved us. In verse 9, it says this, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Are we a church that owns the love of the Father in such a way that His love is who we become? As we disciple the next generation, how can we take ownership of God's love so that we can love kids these days? See, again, I want to remind you that there was two words that Jesus said in this passage: love and remain. Right? What's He mean by remain? He's saying take ownership. Take ownership. You have to own it. Ownership. As crazy and hurt and hard as things may be, love remains. No matter where kids are at or the walk in life that they're on or where they may be, they need loved. They need loved. Are we people that love others? See, I mentioned earlier, fear is not the solution. Empathy is. We don't have to be afraid of what love might look like. We don't have to be afraid that it may hurt sometimes. You know, it may hurt sometimes. But empathy is coming alongside and saying, hey, I don't fully understand. I don't fully know, but I still love you. I'm still cheering you on. I'm sitting on the corner with you as you begin to process this hardship that you're going through. I'm taking ownership of the love that the Father has for me, and I'm passing it on. Right? That's what Jesus is telling His disciples in John 15. I'm taking ownership. Take ownership of the love. Right? For the Father has loved me, I've taken ownership of it, and I'm passing it on. That is your job. Right? That is what you were called to do. You want to know why I didn't reveal myself to the world? Because I left it to you. Right? I left it to you to take ownership of my love so that that love could go and be, and that you could reveal the love of Jesus to the world. Kids these days just need loved. They just need loved. We as adults just need loved.